Well, good afternoon. Chris Yates has been the chief meteorologist at WMBD and WYZZ TV for about 8 years now, starting back in 2015. A graduate of the University of Northern Colorado in 2008, shockingly got a degree in meteorology. Shortly after graduation, he briefly worked for the Twistex tornado research team, and get this, he assisted in deploying probes and instruments in front of tornadoes. That sounds terrifying, Chris. When I read that, I was like, no way. And then he joined our team after he had a stint at KGWN in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Chris and his wife, Krista, and 2 daughters are proud residents of Washington, Illinois. He is also a rocker and was the lead singer in a band in Wyoming. And there are videos on YouTube for proof if you want to look it up. During Q&A, when he takes Q&A, I would challenge anyone here to please ask what the name of the band was. He also still loves to head out to karaoke establishments. You'll see in all kinds of places around the area singing karaoke and belting out a tune. And you will not find someone, from my point of view as the general manager of the station, more dedicated to his craft than Chris. Chris literally gets up every morning, starts forecasting the minute he gets out of bed, does it until 10:30 at night. If there's tornadoes or severe weather in the area, you're going to find Chris on the air no matter if it's his day off or not. He is dedicated to the people of Central Illinois and making sure that they are safe from the storm. Please welcome WMBD's Chief Meteorologist, Chris Yates.
Thank you all for having me. I'll make sure this works.
Oh. Try it now.
Aha. All right. As Sean mentioned, I'm the Chief Met over at WMBD WYZZ here in Peoria, Illinois. There's a little bit about my education. Believe it or not, I actually went to the University of Northern Colorado to actually pursue a degree in music. After doing that for a year, I didn't know what I would do with a music degree. Figured I couldn't make a living off of that. So after experiencing a year's worth of Colorado weather, I needed to figure out what the heck was going on. And so I switched majors into a more science-oriented thing. And I grew up in Southern California. My parents were in the Navy, so we moved around a lot. But Southern California weather is not all that exciting. So I really didn't know much about how cool weather could be until I got to Colorado and was there for a year. And after watching the weather every day on the news, I'm like, I could probably do that. I could mix I always loved science. Didn't know how much, but I love science and I love performing. And I thought being a broadcaster, that would be kind of a nice little blend of the two. And that's how I kind of fell into this career. So as Sean mentioned, started out in Cheyenne, Wyoming, was there for several years before I accepted a position out here. And then I won a number of awards out in Wyoming that really nobody cares about. All right. So here's what we do. A little bit about what we do as broadcasters. I've got a team of, we are a 3-person team. Jeff Andrews is our morning meteorologist. Molly Naisland works on our weekends and some of our afternoon shows. We basically create weather forecasts based on analysis and model data. We don't rip data from the Weather Service and just report it. We make our own forecasts. We see how things are, how we're evolving, and we'll change if we need to. We relay life-saving weather information, especially when we start dealing with severe storms. And we'll also record a number of weather forecasts for our various radio partners in the area. Sean mentioned my routine kind of kicks off when I get up in the morning, and I'm pretty much working on and off throughout the rest of the day. So between 10:30 and noon is usually when I'm making my first forecast of the day. That's done from my home office. I analyze past data, take a look at what's going on now, and then make my forecast from there. The last couple of weeks have been pretty easy. It's been a lot of whatever we had yesterday, we'll have again today. And we're still in that pattern for at least the next couple of days. 2 o'clock is usually about the time I show up at the station. At noon is usually when I record my first radio hit. And then from 2 to 4, I'm usually prepping a bunch of graphics. So all the forecasting has been done before I even step foot into the studio. 4 o'clock is my first newscast, and I'm doing periodic newscast through 6:30. So I'm on the 4, 5, 6, and I'll occasionally do the 5:30, depending on if Molly's on or off. And then I'm back after a little bit of a lunch break. I'm back in the studio at 8, prepping for the 9 and 10 o'clock. At 8 o'clock, I usually make any minor updates. So I check how's my forecast for the day looking. Do I need to adjust my hourlies? And so on. And I'll make some minor tweaks to the forecast if needed. So here's a look at what goes into building a weather forecast. Observational analysis. I love doing hand-drawn surface maps, especially when the weather is getting really bad. Computers can tell us a lot, but they can't tell us everything, and they often overly smooth data. By hand-drawing analysis, I can typically find smaller boundaries that the computers will overlook. And those boundaries are often the focal point for thunderstorms, many of which that can go on to produce some really bad, severe weather. So I'll make an observational analysis. A hand-drawn analysis usually takes about 20 minutes to do. I'll find what I need, and I'll make my adjustments to the forecast based on that. We can track weather in real time using radar and satellite, which I'll show you here in a moment, has come a long way over the past 50 years or so. There's our Viper radar image on top, and the image on the bottom is a visible satellite image from the GOES satellites. Our satellites are, they've gotten pretty advanced. When I was in school, we were getting, back in 2005, 2006, we were getting in one image every 15 minutes. Now I get an image every minute when the weather is really bad. And we have a lot of detail in those images. A lot of these are geostationary or Earth orbiting satellites, so they, at least from our vantage point, they appear to be stationary in the sky if you can actually see them, but they're actually just rotating or orbiting around Earth at the same rate the Earth is spinning. But it gives us a good look at what's going on top of us. So these are our primary weather satellites. They're situated about 22,300 miles over the equator. The other type of satellites we have access to are polar orbiting. These fly at a much lower altitude, but they're constantly moving. And so we don't always get image of the same area. It makes several passes throughout the day. But if we're looking for some high-res images of, say, wildfires, these are usually what we try to turn to. But we just have to wait for the satellite to make its pass before we can see it. So here's a look at how things have changed. The first image there is the first televised picture from space versus a true color imagery of what things kind of look like now. And we can zoom in, and I can see wildfires now popping up because we have heat sensors on the satellites, and I can map out a wildfire before anybody even knows it's there because we can see it sparking. So all the Canadian wildfires, we can see all those on satellite long before anybody is actually able to see smoke because we can pick up the heat signatures. Radar has also undergone, in the last decade, some pretty big changes. Initially, all radar could do was tell us how wide an object was. Now it can tell us how tall that object is as well. And that gives us a 3D look at what kind of image we're looking at. Because before, sometimes it was hard to differentiate heavy rain from hail. Because when rain falls, it often falls flat like a pancake until it hits the ground. Well, if you've got a pretty large raindrop that's being kind of smushed out to 1 inch wide, if you've got an inch-sized diameter hail, both look the same according to radar. Well, now when we look at the 3D profile of it, we can now see how tall that image is, and now we can see what's rain versus what's hail. It gives us a little better idea at pinpointing who's going to see what. So last year, we had large hail that went through Washington. I had a 3-inch hailstone. We had a couple of 3-inch hailstones at my house. We were able to use Viper, and our Doppler radar was able to tell us what was hail versus rain, and so we were able to actually pinpoint neighborhoods that likely saw more hail than rain because of that. Little example of how radar works. The further you get away from the radar site, our primary radar site is down in Lincoln. We're actually pretty fortunate here. We have really good radar coverage compared to a lot of the country. We've got Chicago, Davenport, and Lincoln, and so our area is actually pretty well covered. There's some areas, you can even go out to Quincy, is not well covered. Their closest beam height is about 6,000 feet off the ground, so you're only seeing way up into the sky. So if you're looking for rotation and tornadoes, we need the stuff lower to the ground. Thankfully, here in central Illinois, we have pretty good coverage. We have a really good idea of what's going on, at least closer to the surface. As you can see, the radar beams kind of tilt up. Here's a look at how things have changed over the years. Again, the first hook echo ever seen on radar is on the first image. That hook echo would be where you would expect to see a tornado versus one that we had recently this year. You can see the hook echo there, but we have a lot more detail than we did back then. And our Viper radar at the station is very, very good at seeing that. The software we have really has a 250 some odd color palette. So it really brings in lot of extra detail that you're not going to find on any other station. We also have the ability now, it's not just seeing a hook echo, but we can actually break that down. So I know we're all familiar with when we see radar, you can look at the intensity of rain, but what radar really is good at is depicting motion of certain things moving in the air. And so what you're seeing on the lower left-hand side is the greens and the reds showing what is a tornado vortex signature. I have it circled there. This was a tornado. This happened a few years back. This was an unwarned tornado. It happened around 11 or 10:30 at night. I think it was around 10:30 at night. We had a brief spin-up tornado within a line of, really were showers. There wasn't even any lightning within this line that came on through. It produced a tornado north of Mason City. And you can see that little thing, that little debris ball, I have it circled there, it's a little tiny drop. What the radar, now that we can see things in 2 dimensions, or we can see the height and the width of an object, we can now discern if it's rain or if it's something larger that's being wafted into the air. And so if I'm picking up if I'm starting to see large objects being picked up by the radar in a place where it shouldn't be, I can now tell you that with 100% certainty that that's a tornado or some sort of debris being hit in the air. In this case, that was probably some dirt, dust, or sheet metal that was being hit by from some outbuildings. But again, the radar algorithms are able to highlight that stronger rotation, and so we were able to kind of, with more clarity, hide out where any tornado would be. And the thought that night it went on, if there's anybody that lives between Delavan and Mason City, let us know if you had any damage. And sure enough, there was some farm equipment that was overturned and a few outbuildings that were hit. So model analysis, on any given day, I probably look at 10 different weather models. That's probably the minimum. When it gets real active, I'm looking at a lot more. Just depends on the situation. You can see a list of various models I have there that I look at on a daily basis. A lot of people are probably familiar with the European model. You might have heard that thrown around a lot, or the American model, which is the GFS. Both have their strengths and weaknesses. I understand the biases of various models, and I try to use that when I make a forecast. Some people, because I've had people ask, why don't you just average all the models together and show that? And we do that. We do have a process for that. But if I know a model is stronger at handling a storm system or a certain pattern or a certain way, I'm going to put more of my weight into its outcome than, say, another. That's where your schooling is. Delivering a forecast. Our weather segments are done live during our newscast. We don't record our stuff. And usually, this has changed, I'll show you in a minute, we stand in front of our chroma key. Basically, we take that color green, we tell our computers in the back, whatever is that color green, put whatever we have on this computer behind me, and we call it good. That's probably the oldest technology in the building right now, believe it or not. But it still works really well. But we've had an upgrade recently. Thanks, Sean. So we have a lot more flexibility here. I'm not now just limited to the green screen. I can be at a number of different places on this set, including there's a big, it might be hard to make out, the little L-shaped monitor wall there has been real fun to play with in terms of doing the weather on that. But we have a lot more flexibility on this new set. So there's times where this looks virtual because it's so sharp. But it is really a cool thing. If you ever get a chance to swing by the station, it is cool to see in person. And now I figured I would leave you with some bad news. Our drought. I always like to give a little forecast and kind of give you a state of how things are going. So obviously drought continues to worsen in Illinois, especially in our area. We've seen an expansion of severe drought. We've been well below average in rainfall, basically through much of May and June. But if we were to go back to April, since April 1st, Peoria has only picked up about 4 3/4 of an inch of rain. And as of June 20th, that was about 6.5 inches below average. Friends in Normal we're 7 inches below average. Now this is worse because this data is a couple days old. But we're in the top 10 in terms of driest, at least from April 1st through June 20th on record. We're getting into a concerning part of this where our severe drought is now going to start hampering our ability to actually pick up some rain. It's what we call a negative feedback loop. Because the air is so dry and because our ground is so dry, there's less moisture now in what we call the boundary layer, the layer of the atmosphere that is basically over the ground. That is now very dry, that any rain that comes in is going to have to overcome that dryness before it actually produces rainfall. So anytime we now look at storms coming in from Iowa, I've got to be concerned that those storms are going to evaporate before they actually get here. This happened a couple years ago in Southeast Illinois. Folks in Champaign couldn't buy a drop of rain. They did just everything, even no matter what it was coming for them. The entire storm would evaporate before it hit Champaign County. Because this is such a pretty vast area that's under this drought, keep in mind they've got drought conditions in Iowa too. That's a lot of dry air that's going to have to be overcome before we can actually get some meaningful rain. Now it can be overcome eventually. You just got to have a very persistent weather pattern bringing us multiple shots of moisture that can eventually overcome that. And we will eventually. It's just not going to be as quick as we would like it to be. You know, those pop-up showers we would normally get in the afternoon, thunderstorms, those are going to be a little harder to come by the longer this goes on because we just don't have that boundary layer moisture available. So moisture coming in from the Gulf of Mexico is just not going to have the same effect as it normally would. Here's our forecast for the next 7 days. The best chance of rain we have is Saturday night. Usually those chances would be higher, but we're looking at those drought conditions. I'm thinking it's probably not going to be as widespread as it should be with a system that's coming in. And then that's really about it. We haven't talked more than a 40% chance of rain, I think, in the last month. And right now, 40% is probably about as high as I'm willing to go on any forecast until things start to change. Here's the extended forecast. Obviously, it's hot, dry. Saturday is going to be quite warm, 95. It's not going to be dangerously hot because the humidity isn't going to be terrible. So we're not getting into heat advisory criteria. Usually this time of year, if it hits 95, you know you're looking at heat indices over 100. That's probably not going to be an issue. But it does look a little cooler next week. Now, here's something from the Climate Prediction Center. This was their outlook last night for the period between June 27th and July 1st. Now, these are often misunderstood, and we don't do a good job explaining this on air because it's quite complicated. These basically show you the probabilities of seeing above, below, or near average temperatures or precipitation. So you would probably look at that and assume, based on how this map is made, that we are going to see below average temperatures between June 27th and July 1st. What this really means is we have a slightly better chance of seeing below average temperatures between that period on average. It's not a guarantee. So the areas in gray, they're expecting, there's about a 33% chance or slightly better than 33% chance they'll see near normal. We have a slightly better than 33% chance of seeing below average temperatures. More confidence, the darker the colors get, the greater the confidence in that particular thing occurring. So down near Dallas and Houston, you can probably bet it's going to be above average there. And there's greater chance that parts of West Virginia and Ohio, it'll be below average here, there. Close to us, a little more hit and miss. And the precipitation outlook, again, this goes back to the impacts from the drought. Basically, where you have drought conditions is where you see a break in that above average precip. So this is all being factored into these outlooks now. Drier, it's looking a bit drier, a little quieter across the south. And while the pattern is looking more active, we are heading into a more favorable pattern that would typically bring us rain, but because of the drought, we're now wondering how much of that rain we're actually going to get. Beyond that, as we get into the 4th of July kind of stretch there, it looks like the return of above average, or at least a greater chance of above average temperatures, and near average to above average precip. Again, notice the break where we have droughts across parts of the Midwest and the Corn Belt. And then I figured I'd go into a more of a seasonal outlook, July, August through September. They say forecast, NOAA and the Climate Prediction Center forecast a greater than a more likely chance of above average temperatures. And we're in what is called equal chances for precip, which means we don't know what's going to happen. Statistically speaking, it can go either way. But again, that's a pattern. The pattern towards the end of summer looks more favorable for storms. It's just what kind of impact the drought is going to have. So the longer this drags on, if we can't get any rain this weekend, and there's another reasonable shot probably coming in towards the end of next week, if neither of those can bring us something meaningful, I think we're going to be in for a very long and hot and dry summer. So we're almost to the make or break point here on that. So hopefully we can get something here in the next few shots. And that's all I have, but I'm willing to take questions.
Can't remember. I'll just yell. What's the difference between, I think I know, but maybe not, humidity and dew point? And then what's your favorite karaoke song?
All right. First, what difference between humidity and dew point? Dew point is the actual, we get this question a lot, by the way, and we actually talk about dew point more than humidity because, in my opinion, let's start with it. Dew point is the measure of moisture in the air. Humidity is a calculation of that moisture relative to the temperature. So it's, if your dew point and temperature are the same, you would have 100% humidity. But if you're trying to figure out, boy, when you go outside and say it's real humid today, you'll say that when the dew point is at like 70 degrees on a 90-degree day, although your relative humidity there is probably only 50%. But you're not going to say in the winter when it's 40 degrees out and you got a dew point of 40, man, it's real humid today, because it just doesn't feel that way. So we often look at the dew point. So if you're looking at comfort, the higher the dew point, the less comfortable it's going to be. The warmer the temperatures are, the more moisture the air can hold. So that's why, it gets a little more uncomfortable as temperatures warm up this time of year. But that's why we look at that. Because the relative humidity, if I were to compare relative humidity in the summer and winter, the humidity is often going to be higher in the winter. It's just not going to feel that way.
Karaoke.
Karaoke song, probably my go-to now is Renegade by Styx.
Wow.
I don't know about I don't know.
First of all, I just want to say thank you. That was really interesting. And you probably don't know this, but my husband is the self-appointed president of your fan club. He absolutely loves you and watches you all the time. We always get into conversations, though, because I will look on my app, like just real quick, and it's a different forecast than what you've said, and I'm quickly corrected by him that you have said something different. Are these pulling from that like American, European, like because one app will say one thing, another says something different, and I didn't understand.
Yeah, so each app is basically pulling from a different model. If you use the Weather Channel app, they use something called IntelliCast, which is it's a model that averages out all the different models, but has a little more weight, it seems, towards the European model. But that's all it is. Now, they will make, the Weather Channel personnel will go and make adjustments to this forecast, but mainly for bigger cities. They're not going to make those adjustments for, say, Peoria. Why would they spend the time on that? Other smaller apps will use their own, will just pull from either the GFS or the European. I'm going to guess it's the American GFS because that's free. European model data has to be paid for. And the GFS, if you're just going off of that, and if you ever look at the app, you're going to get wild swings in the forecast often, especially when you're in an active pattern. You might see the temperature jump 20 degrees every 6 hours because that's what the models are doing. As forecasters, we try to eliminate that, and we try to find some middle ground and keep the forecast in a steady direction. So 7 days out, I can't tell you with any certainty what the forecast is going to be, but I can give you a ballpark. And if I see that the trend is for warmer temperatures or cooler temperatures down the road, I'm going to try to identify that in the forecast and gradually get us to that point. And then once we get within 4 or 5 days, we really start honing in on the details. With our app, everything we do, everything is adjusted manually by us. So that's the cool thing about local apps, is we have a little bit more control over that. But to answer your question, a lot of it's just automated model data. And it's going to have wild fluctuations that doesn't take into account some of the things that forecasters will personally see. For instance, the models for this weekend are probably a little too high in their chances for rain because they're not factoring in the current drought conditions. They're just saying, hey, the models want to produce all this rain. And so it's, their chances might be a little bit higher.
So I will download your app.
You could.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
So I have two questions, and a thank you for being here. So I'm wondering, you know how in football, if you sack the quarterback, you get a bonus? This is how my head is working right now. If you get the forecast right, does Sean pay you extra?
No. But he doesn't.
Would that help?
No, I'm assuming if I get a bonus for getting the forecast right, there's probably going to be some sort of penalty for getting it wrong.
And then did I hear you were a storm chaser?
I did a little storm chasing in my, when I first started out. Back before gas was super expensive, and now I've got a family, so I don't do it as often. I would love to get back out there. I'm not going to get in front of them anymore. But that was strictly for research purposes. I enjoy watching storms from a good distance. So half mile to a mile away is where I like to see the whole storm, not just the dust that's being kicked up. So I like to experience the whole thing if we can. Yeah, a little storm chasing. It's important, I think, for most or any meteorologist really, to see what's happening, what you see on radar, and then go out and see it happen in person. Gives you a lot of perspective. When I'm doing our severe storm coverage, I think that's a big reason why I'm able to actually, with a little more confidence, predict how things are going to play out in the next 15, 20 minutes, because I've seen it happen so many times in the field. And so when I'm on air, we'll go back to April 4th of this year. I was talking about how this storm, and I told Molly, I said, Molly, this thing is going to push into Fulton County. It's going to make a right turn, and it's going to produce a tornado somewhere in Fulton County. And I said, it could be a big one. That was based on all my experience as a storm chaser. I knew exactly what that thing was going to do. The models didn't tell me that. My gut told me that. And so that's what getting out in the field can do if you do it enough. And you do it safely. You don't necessarily, not a fan of driving into the things. The group I was with, they were deploying turtle probes to try to get hit instead of themselves. That's what we did.
I'm a frequent viewer, and I noticed that you wear a coat and tie, but you have tennis shoes on.
Sometimes, yeah.
Is there a reason for that?
Shoes are more comfortable. I have only one pair of dress shoes right now, which are the ones I'm wearing currently. So after the week, I get a little tired. But yeah, it just depends on how much I'm going to be walking around that day. I've been a little more mindful of with our new set because we get full body profiles now a lot more. So I've been wearing my dress shoes a little more often, but there's times I've been wearing tennies if I know I'm going to be running around a little bit. All severe weather days, I'm usually in tennies because I know I'm going to be running around a bit.
It's the style these days, though, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the name of the band?
Dolly got a job, Dolly.
Shaving Peggy. I didn't make it up. They already had the YouTube it. Just be careful which links you click on.
Jen was talking about the app earlier.
Yep.
This morning, my app said that there was a chance of rain someplace here. Did anybody actually get rain today?
There is a 10%, I had a 10% chance of rain in the forecast. If we're going to see it, it would happen between 2 and 7 this afternoon. A 10% chance. It would be a random pop-up shower.
Chris, I know you've done a lot for us at the ballpark, so I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. I'm going to send you the schedule.
Okay.
And every time that we play, can you just tell people it's going to be like 80 with a light breeze?
I'll see what I can do.
That would help. No, we do appreciate, because I'm a self-appointed 6-month meteorologist during the baseball season. But I do have a question. Do you follow, because it's something I learned, well, I should be learned. I was told I needed to start learning. Is there anybody local that does AQI? Is that something you guys do? Or
We can. We've been lately because it's been such a bigger topic.
Can you explain?
Air quality index.
Oh, yeah,
I had this actual question brought up on my Facebook page the other day. Somebody asked, why are we talking so much about the air quality? A couple of reasons. A, it's been moved up higher on our priority list because we have no other weather going on. And B, it's actually impacting people because we had a lot more smoke than normal. So we get that data directly from the EPA, and we try to relay that. Sometimes they'll make a forecast, and I'm like, I think it's going to be a little worse or a little better, and so I'll tweak that. But I try not to. That's not an area that I'm super familiar with, unless it's very obvious with like smoke, for instance. We have really good smoke models. But that airnow.gov is usually where you can find that information, and they give you a nice 3 to 4 day forecast on that. I've often seen their forecast though from one day to the next kind of change suddenly because air quality is a little tricky. Our Barron model for that is not very good. That's probably the model we do have that's built into our system is not great with that, so we tend to not use it. But that's the best website to go. And I would check on that, especially given the amount of haze we've got. And then we've had a lot of ozone lately, just given how warm and dry it's been. That ozone's getting kind of stuck down towards the ground. And we've had more air quality alerts up north, up in Wisconsin, Chicago area. They've been under a lot of air quality alerts lately. And a lot of that's due to the smoke from the Canadian wildfires. So hopefully that'll start to clear out with this pattern change coming in, because right now everything's just kind of sitting. Hopefully this will mix that out a little bit in the coming days.
Just out of curiosity, with the resources, with the satellite images, are those a government-provided network of satellites, or is it a private sector? How do you access that information? Just out of curiosity, or is that available to other outlets like your?
Yeah, the cool thing about the U.S. is everything's taxpayer funded. You all have access to it. There's a lot of great websites. The one I like to use, if you guys want to write it down, is weather.cod.edu. They have a really good, they've got model data. They've also got the satellite, and I usually use their stuff for satellite data as well. Really good interface, easy to use, and it's all taxpayer funded, so it's all free to us. Once you start getting out into European and Japanese and satellites that we do have access to because we pay for it through our vendor, you guys won't have access necessarily to that. But anything that's American funded is all available to taxpayers if you know where to look for.